Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Boxed Out. I'm your host, Amanda Lynn, and I'm so thrilled to be back with you on our first stream. We have been talking about a lot of things in these last 4 episodes. We've touched on the way we meet basic needs in our community, how we handle food security, the ways that conservation and housing intersect with each other. And today I am so excited because we are going to dig into the community land trust model, which I personally find to be one of the most powerful tools to address our housing crisis that exists. And even better, we have some pioneers in the community land trust movement with us, Lisa Byers of OPAL Community Land Trust and Jolie Brunner of OPAL Community Land Trust. Thank you both for being here. I am so excited to have you.
Nice to be with you, Amanda.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So just to kick things off, can you give us a little bit of a background on OPAL and how CLTs work? Maybe just an overview of the model itself.
So why don't I do that one, Julie, and Julie will elaborate and correct me when I stray. So the Community Land Trust got started in San Juan County right around the same time as the Conservation Land Bank got started. And there was a real growing awareness that real estate prices were escalating really fast. And that was resulting in people who live and work in the islands not being able to afford to stay here. So neighbors started to get concerned because their friends were making decisions to leave because they couldn't afford to stay. So the effort to get the enabling legislation for the conservation REIT was started in the late 1980s. There was also a group starting to look at different ways to deliver affordable housing in San Juan County. And the pioneers at that time, Peter Fisher, Michael Skye, Penny Sharp Skye, and then over from Lopez, Sandy Bishop, Rhea Miller, some others from over there, latched onto the community land trust model that had become more common back east, but wasn't really up and running on the West Coast yet. So the way the community land trust model works, and I think what excited those folks was that it really does mimic some of the same commitment to long-term affordability or long-term stewardship that you see on the conservation land trust side. Nonprofit organization, the Community Land Trust acquires land and commits to owning that in perpetuity. And it acquires that land with grants and donations. So there's no debt service against the land. And that's a critical piece. Then the Community Land Trust makes that land available to individuals who are otherwise unable to get access in the traditional market through a 99-year ground lease with an option to renew for another 99 years. And that ground lease kind of jiggers up some of the traditional bundle of property rights that we're accustomed to in a fee simple real estate market, where the individuals have to be owner occupied. They can't sublet it to short-term rental it or to live somewhere else. The idea is that you're providing housing for the community. And then one of the other critical pieces is in that lease, there is a resale formula that says the Community Land Trust is going to bring a bunch of money to help make the original price of your home affordable. And then in exchange, you're going to pay that forward to the next generation of home buyer by selling your home at a price that's calculated by a formula in the lease. And that formula is designed to sort of mimic wages. The idea is that we're really working, this is housing for people who live and work and this is their home. So we take the idea of real estate as being a commodity where there's ups and downs and your ability to profit or benefit from housing really depends on when you get on and off that roller coaster ride of real estate prices.
Sure.
We take that out and just turn it into a very simple, slow, steady, like bond rate of return. You just go up with wages. So that's how the Community Land Trust works. Julie, do you want to add anything before I get into kind of OPAL's story?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I'd say is that most people come to the community land trust world, or many people come to the community land trust world in today's environment because of exceptionally high housing costs. And so this is a way to, create a stock of homes within your community that are affordable to the folks who live and work there, and that will remain so over time. So there's no sort of windfall profit for one subset of people who happen to luck into this housing. But over time, groups like OPAL and others across the country have kind of diversified our portfolios to include rental housing, so affordable rentals, and OPAL has some commercial spaces. The folks over on Lopez do some agricultural work. So, you know, the idea of community ownership is sort of grounded in affordable home ownership for most community land trusts, but also includes whatever community needs might be there for, you know, for Orcas, for Lopez, for San Juan, for community X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, I think one of our favorites is that in England, there's a small town that was at risk of losing its pub. And so they coalesced and they, as a community, created a community land trust to own the land under the pub. And then a small business owner could run the pub, but they always knew that that community would have a pub. So
that's perfect.
So then OPAL's story picks up with, you know, people having done that research and decided this community land trust model really felt like a great match for the islands. And so OPAL, the group of folks who had gathered around and were holding meetings every week to kind of figure out how to do this, they were all volunteers, and a couple of volunteers stepped up to sort of start writing grants because the State Housing Trust Fund had just gotten started. They wrote a grant and they got the money, and they're like, oh my God, what do we do now? And in fact, they ended up then having a whole nother year of trying to figure out how to do mortgage financing for on a leasehold interest. And there was sort of one critical moment where people were feeling really discouraged, and they thought they were going to just have to say to the granting agency, sorry, we got to give the money back. But one person, OPAL follows the consensus model, and so one person said, nope, I'm not going to vote to do that. We got to hang on. And that was Peter Fisher. And they did hang on. And then they found a woman named Mary Berkey who helped them tap into using mortgage financing from USDA. And OPAL Community Land Trust became the first community land trust in the country to use the mortgage financing that's available through USDA. So the OPAL Commons neighborhood got built, and there was a real shift in the community from a lot of skepticism before OPAL Commons was built to after it was built, you know, people sort of lining up and saying, oh, this is a really good idea, and let's do more. So briefly then, OPAL's journey over the last 35 years has been listening to the community and responding as best we could to meet needs in a variety of different ways. So we built a few neighborhoods where we did the whole neighborhood from scratch, buy the land, design the homes, install the infrastructure, build the homes. And then we developed a place for both our offices and for rental housing. And then we started to really be clear that the range of need in the community just kept expanding.
Yeah.
That as more and more property turned over to the next generation of islanders, those little out of the way guest houses or sort of funky accommodations were becoming fewer. So there was a growing need at the very low end of the income scale. And so that really fueled us to continue to do rental housing. And at the same time, there's a growing need as the real estate prices escalated at the moderate and middle income range. So over our tenure, we have continued to try and deliver housing all across that whole range, from people exiting homelessness or exiting a really shoddy living situation, maybe where they don't have plumbing or heat, and they used to just heat with a wood stove and now they're getting older, whatever, you know, just accommodations that many of us, I think a lot of people would actually be shocked at the kinds of accommodations that exist around these islands. So we try and help folks who are ready to leave those situations and all the way up through middle income. And we can talk more about how we do that. But
amazing. Yeah, I think it's been
at this point, you know, one of the things that's extraordinary about working in a small community is you can really see the impact of your work over time. And so both OPAL and Lopez Community Land Trust, I think we both house about 8% of the year-round population of our islands, which I don't know of any other community in the country that has that level of permanently affordable housing that's available. And you know, still that's great. And we've got so many people knocking on our door because they just can't access housing in any other way.
So much need. Yeah. But I mean, thinking about the achievement of that 8% of that island is protected and will always be available to working class community members, so that there is always going to be a level of economic diversity. I mean, that's incredible. And it's big thanks to you two. You've both been with OPAL for a long time and leading this work in the islands for a long time. So throughout all that storytelling Lisa's been doing, these two have been really the anchors of that. And that kind of brings me to my next question for you, which I would love to hear how each of you found yourself at the precipice of the CLT movement in the islands, and kind of what was your origin and how did you get to that point of OPAL and the level of commitment you have?
Julie, you want to go first?
You want me to start? Sure, yeah. Sure. So I learned about community land trust when I was a funder. I worked for a local government in Georgia, a city county government, and I was responsible for giving out the HUD funding that the entitlement municipality received. So it was all of the home and CDBG and supportive housing SHP funding. And there was a new startup community land trust in that community. And so I was excited when I learned about it. And I thought, well, this is really like a genius way to do affordable home ownership, because it just is genius, right? It creates this permanent stock. Instead of helping one family and then losing the unit and never being able to get that unit back, we were able to kind of flip that idea and create homes that were going to remain affordable. So that was really exciting to me. And I did some research, and I was trying to sell it to the decision makers, the county council, the city county government. And I came across this video, and this woman, Lisa Byers, was in the video. And so I watched the video, and someone had this book that they shared with me, which was about OPAL Community Land Trust. So I passed that book around. And I did that work for a couple of years. And then my husband finished graduate school, and we found ourselves moving to Orcas Island. So I thought, oh, I remember this story about this organization on Orcas Island. So we moved here I came Labor Day weekend 2001, and I can remember, we landed and unpacked, and I had 2 small children at the time, but it didn't take long when I was I was pretty antsy pretty quick in terms of wanting to look for work. And I joked with my husband to be 5:01. I'm like, the kids have had their bath, the dinner's ready, where are you? And he looked at me and he said, you need a job. And I said, I know. So I opened the little weekly newspaper that night, and there was a job listing for OPAL, which ended the next day, or 2 days later. I think we get our paper on Wednesdays. I think Friday was the closing date for that job. So I was like, oh, look, that little organization I knew about is hiring. So I applied for the job, and I like to tease Lisa because the job posting was for 16 hours a week for 6 months. And here I am 23 years later, having worked 16 hours a week for 23 years. So anyway, that was how I ended up here. And then, as I said, I always thought it was, when I learned about community land trusts in Georgia, and community land trust origin story is actually from Georgia. So that was also kind of interesting. So anyway, when I learned about that there, I thought it was great. And then I felt delighted to be able to come and work for OPAL, because I knew it was a small organization. I thought the chances of them having a job opening were pretty thin. And I think they were delighted to have someone who knew anything about housing or community land trusts. And I had worked in housing before. I worked for the local government, so I had some experience that was relevant there too. So, it felt quite, I felt quite lucky, right, to land in that spot where I could actually do the work that I love in a place that I love, and that we've been living here now for 23 years.
Amazing.
So in my story, I was living back east in the Boston area, and had finished graduate school and had learned enough about myself to know that I'm actually a small town gal. And so I was starting that journey and came out to the islands with my girlfriend at the time to sort of have a break. And in the course of that, just fell in love with not only the beauty of the place, but also the people. And within about 6 months, I had a conversation with Penny Sky, who was one of the co-founders of OPAL, and really similar to you, Julie, when I heard about how the model works, it just resonated to my core. Like, this just aligned with my values around land as a limited resource, by sort of not having some people who have a lot of access and other people who don't have access. It just didn't feel right to me. And this idea of really thinking long term somehow also resonated with me, that we need to not only be thinking about the needs in the present, but we need to be thinking about the needs hundreds of years down the road. So I ended up moving to the county and took a job with the San Juan County Land Bank. I worked for the Land Bank for almost 2 years as the second staff person with Ruth Mahan. And I was on the board of OPAL. And then a position as executive director of OPAL opened up, and I resigned the board and applied for that. And so since 1996, I have been here at OPAL doing this work and just loving it and feeling, your question about, on the precipice was a little bit like, that sounds like such a lofty word. So it sort of got me thinking about lofty words, and it has felt really like, honestly, like a privilege and a lot of luck. It's hard in life to find work that is so aligned with your values, and where you get to work with so many people who actually want to make a difference, both from the home buyer and the renter side of the, people are trying to just live here so they can be part of the community. Yeah. And when they get so distracted by how hard it is to live here, then they can't be members of the community. They can't be full members of the community. So to be able to witness that transition where people really blossom after housing is stabilized, that just is a real honor.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, I totally hear you both. And I think I've told you at other times that we've chatted about this. I was similar. I found out about the community land trust model, and I just knew that was the direction that I was headed. It just made so much sense to me. It tied together all of the housing and economic justice work that I had been trying to figure out how to impact in a big way. And I hear you. I feel so privileged to do this work, and that we get to do it together is even more awesome. So that's a great segue into, why do you believe that community land trusts are such an important tool for the housing crisis today, right now?
Well, I think we've touched on it a little bit. I mean, housing is a basic need. And the fact that there are so many people in our community who are unstably housed or unhoused just means that our community as a whole is not as strong or resilient as it could be. And so to me, that's sort of the core reason in this moment. But the idea that I'm actually also a community land trust homeowner, and for me to be able, and it's because my wife owned her home at the time that we got together, and so I came to it by marriage, so to speak, although at any rate, that's another story. But it feels really good to know that the housing that I get to enjoy today is available to someone who's working and caring and loving this place. So for me, it's a combination of, it's a very practical tool, and it aligns with a lot of values around how I feel like we need to sort of rethink the way that we humans engage on this planet if we're going to really be a more sustainable force on the planet.
Yeah. How about you, Julie?
I mean, I think there's the bigger question of the, kind of global housing crisis. I also do consulting in addition to working for OPAL and exclusively for, community land trusts and resale restricted programs. And I get calls from corners of the country I never thought would be calling me about the affordable housing crisis, from Milwaukee to Nebraska to like very small towns and in just places I never imagined would have where there would be that kind of strain on affordable housing. So clearly we've kind of hit a different place. And one of the it's taken OPAL 30 years to grow a portfolio that's that houses an eighth of the island's population, which is great. And I agree with Lisa that it's extraordinary that we've been able to hit sort of a mass that's large enough that, it can really make a real impact on our community forevermore. So my hope is that other communities are able to, think about it along those terms where, clearly it's not, we're not going to build our way out of this problem. And my husband is a oak tree planter, and he always says the best time to plant an oak tree is 100 years ago, and the second best time is today. And I think the same thing is true for this kind of work that we're doing in community land trusts and long-term affordability in terms of housing. And so, we're lucky in Washington State where our rental housing that's affordable and that's subsidized by the state, and really anyway, is kind of permanently affordable now. But there's communities all over the country where the restrictions are 15 years and then those units are lost. So they're working hard to create units, and they're losing more units every year than they're building. And so I think that's why community land trusts are such an important tool for the housing crisis, because it is a long-term permanent solution that creates a community asset. We think about, our communities think about open space, they think about art, they think about community centers, and they're starting to think about housing in that kind of context. And that's what we bring to the table.
Yeah. And we have to start thinking about it in that context. It has to be, as you mentioned, a community asset. I use that word a lot when I'm talking about community land trusts and about our portfolio, and I'm describing what we're actually creating, because that's really what it is. Just like a community center, just like a library. These are things that we need. It's infrastructure that we need to have a healthy community. And I think one of the sort of most impressive parts of the model to me when I first started getting into community land trust was the inclusivity of it. Two kind of pieces of the model that I don't know are super well known to sort of laymen or folks that are getting introduced are the fact that typically it's expected that at least a third of a board on a community land trust is made up of people who are community land trust homeowners. And community land trusts are membership organizations, which means that their members are voting and making decisions about the direction of the organization. And I think that structure is really important from a sort of political standpoint, from just a community solidarity standpoint. And I wonder if you two have any reflections on why CLT members are such an important part of the community land trust model.
So I absolutely value, first of all, having community land trust homeowners and renters be a third of the board. That is a key piece of making sure that the governance of the organization stays really grounded in the reality of the term people use now, people with lived experience, but it's sort of like making sure there's not a us and them element, that it's a we together figuring out how to make decisions. And then key to having members is actually just staying really grounded in what does the community's need, because we're here in service to what the community needs, not for any other purpose. And so it is the community that gives us that information, both emotional and empirical. And so, I mean, one example in OPAL's journey is that we were really very happy in that home ownership lane. That was like the core of the organization's DNA, and we would probably very happily have just continued doing more home ownership for the island. But we heard really loudly from our members, this island needs rental housing. And so we kind of drug our feet a little bit. We're like, because being a rental property owner is a really different world than the relationship we have with our homeowners. It's a real partnership, and they own their home, and we're here as a backstop if they want us. But being a property owner of rental property is a really different way of relating and a way of different managing an organization. And so, but that's what the community said they needed, and we were here to serve the community. So that's what we did. And then I think, another piece that is just critical, we could not be the size we are today or serving the people we are today without the level of financial support that we've gotten from the community. And, we are really blessed in that way to be in a community. There's, massive income inequality in this community. I was easily 5 or 6 years ago that I saw an article that was inventorying income inequality around the country. And we were the county with the 10th highest level of income inequality in the entire country. And that's just stunning if you think about, the level of wealth that's here, but also the level of poverty. So having access to people who share those values, who really get that, there's actually a number of our supporters who are really clear that the reason they donate to us is because they know they were kind of lucky and they were part of the problem by buying real estate within the market. I mean, out of no fault of their own, but just because of the way the system is set up, they bought property that inflated the value of real estate, that makes it more expensive, that makes it harder for people who live here. So having supporters who both guide us in the work that we do and then support us financially has been just huge.
Yeah.
And the only thing I'll add to that part of the story is, in my consulting work, I work with communities across the country. And so there's two other highlights for me about membership and the 1/3 board members is the sort of some checks and balances. So I OPAL, just as you all on San Juan, we own millions of dollars of property in this community. And it's important that the governance around that community ownership be community based. And so, in the long run, most nonprofits have what the community land trust world anyway calls self-perpetuating boards, where, there might be 8 or 10 board members, and when, they kind of recruit the next board members just internally, right? So those 8 or 10 people will sit around, think of other people they might like to get to join the board for whatever expertise they're looking for. And, it works quite well for most organizations, but you can imagine a scenario in which, a few of the wrong people are sitting around that table in 20 years when the rest of us are long gone. And there could be very different decisions made about that kind of real estate in the future. And so that community that homeowners on the board is a great check and balance, and that community ownership is really important as it's reflected in membership. And our members elect our board of directors. And if we were to try to sell any land, our bylaws state that the members would have to approve that. So those are really kind of key components and tenets to the checks and balances that are built into most community land trusts.
Yeah, it's a good protection because, as you said, it could be very, very easy to think about those assets differently 20, 30, 40 years down the road than today. So okay, well, I want to shift gears a little bit and get back into OPAL's history. And I would love to hear from you both some of the greatest wins or successes that you've experienced in your time at OPAL, as well as some of the biggest challenges that you have seen occur.
I can start, Julie, unless you've got something that
Sure.
Okay. So I already talked about sort of the consensus decision-making model, and that one, I just want to lift it up again, that it has been really important to me in the history of OPAL to see the way in which having homeowners and renters on our board and having that consensus model kind of transforms people. So it's not uncommon for us to have board members who've been really successful in business, like they've been Fortune 500, even Fortune 100 companies out in the world, really type A, awesome out in the world. And then they reach a point, and part of their moving to the island is they're looking for something a little more or something a little different, a slightly different shift. And witnessing that journey of someone who's been in very powerful positions and has been used to sort of being a driver and a decision maker, sit at a table in equal footing with people who've had very different life journeys and really listening and understanding each other's perspective has been really powerful to witness. So one, I just think the consensus model has been great. But there's lots of just really fun stories in our history. I mean, part of, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, Julie, we kind of came up with this paradigm that our role in the community is to be nimble and responsive. Like the community comes to us, there's lots of ideas of things that come to us. And what we strive to do is try and enact as many of those that align with our mission and that we can make work financially and that makes sense. And so one of my favorite is the Terry Lane house, where this guy walked into the office one day. And he was kind of, disheveled in a way, and looked like an island character, and asked to speak to me. And he said, "You don't know me, but I'm going to make your day. I think I'm going to make your day." I was like, "Okay, let's sit down." And this is a guy who had written a lot of stories about Bigfoot, and had made enough money through his writing that he was ready to move to a retirement home, didn't need the asset from the sale of his home in order to retire comfortably, and wanted to gift his house to us. Mm-hmm. So he did make our day. The house, was a kind of a quirky house in line with the guy who was a little bit quirky himself. But we, because it was a gift to us, we were then able to renovate it and turn it into a community land trust homeownership home. And it's had one owner for the last, one community land trust homeowner for the last 12 years, who actually runs the exchange here on Orcas, Pete Moe. So, Julie, over to you for a popcorn of another highlight.
Yeah, I mean, I think we certainly have had our share of challenges, right? Like, we were in the middle of a 32-unit construction project when the market fell out from beneath everyone's feet back in 2008, 2009, whenever that was. I mean, I can remember when the first bank closure happened, and we were all like, this is like what happened in the 30s, right? Like, are we talking about the same thing here? And we were, right? Like, so, we had this moment in time where we were like, uh-oh, like, what is happening and what do we do? And kind of back to that membership component.
I mean, like, we were counting on donations coming in the door, and donations plummeted.
Yeah.
Everything plummeted. Lenders stopped lending, donors stopped giving, everything just came to a screeching halt. And we thought, are we supposed to stop and just hold tight for a few minutes and then carry on? Or are we supposed to plow forward because this is going to end someday and we're going to need to, keep moving? And so we convened a group of our, kind of people in our community who were supporters and members to talk it through. People, those folks that Lisa just mentioned, who had a lot of experience in the business world and in the industries, particularly that we were in, housing, or, whether it's, construction or development or whatever. And they were like, plow forward, move on. It will be more expensive to stop and restart than, the risk you're taking by carrying on. So having the community support us as we move forward really made a difference, and gave us the confidence to do it, even in that very, very scary moment. So, we've had, I think one of the things that Lisa and I, as, kind of team members, always really, we kind of enjoy the challenges sometimes, right? Like, we like a good challenge. We have them all the time. This industry is, always evolving and always changing. And just when we think we've cracked one nut, there's another one that comes rolling in front of us. And so that's part of what's interesting about this work. And then, we have these things at our board meeting. We start each board meeting with what we call OPAL moments. And so I think for me, some of our greatest wins are these little tiny small moments that we get to experience when we're witnessing our neighborhoods just be neighborhoods and be lovely, lovely places for people in this community to live. And most recently, I was riding my bike into one of the neighborhoods to go check on an elderly homeowner. It was like a beautiful sunny September day. And maybe it was like Labor Day or a weekend or something, or just a beautiful September day. I can't quite remember, but there were a lot of people out because, those September days, like, you never know when the last beautiful day is going to be. So you better be outside when it's happening. And I pulled into the neighborhood and I felt like I was Mr. Rogers. Like, people were like popping their heads out of their doors and waving at me. There were people, there were small children, there were old people, there were working people in between. And it just really, kind of reinforces that's why we do this work, is for that, to help our community, have these neighborhoods and these spaces where people can thrive.
So I have one other story that I want to tell, because another colleague of ours who's been with OPAL for a long time is Jeannie Beck. And Jeannie was actually the first executive director of OPAL, then left OPAL And then she came back, I got to hire her back as the sort of project manager. And Jeannie, when you talked about loving a challenge, Jeannie loves a challenge. She loves to figure out how to make something happen that otherwise people would go, oh, no, we can't make that happen. So after we got through the Great Recession, like toward the end of the recession, and we had gone ahead and we were building Wild Rose Meadow, and we knew we had taken out debt to finish that neighborhood. And we'd never done that before because we'd always made sure that we had all of the sources of funding available before we started. So we thought we were going to have a quiet couple of years trying to pay off that debt. And it was mid-December, and I got a call from a local realtor who said, I've got a client who owns a house up on the North Shore. It's a really sweet house built in the 40s, but it's not going to meet the family's needs anymore. And they need it to be removed from the property so that they can build a new house. And, so it's going to go to the dump. And this is a long shot, but would you guys want to move it? And at that point we had move a house? What? So we dove in and we, found out that there are house moving companies all around the Puget Sound area. And the one part of that conversation that I was kind of like, oh boy, was that the message was, this is mid-December. It's yours if you can move it by the end of February. So luckily we had some land. We found Nickel Brothers, who is going to be familiar as a house moving company to a lot of folks now. And that started a whole new business model for us that we ran with up until about 4 years ago, when the modeling of the business model, it just doesn't work as well as it used to in terms of financing. So we have 12 houses that we've moved, and I know the Home Trust on San Juan has done that as well. And we've had most of them from somewhere else in Washington State along Puget Sound, one from Canada, a few of them from the island. And it's just a great part of the story. We've got one house that a woman, Irene O'Neill, who lives on the island, remembers going to that house. She's lived on the island most of her life, and she remembers going to that house for piano lessons, I think.
Huh. Cool.
When we moved the house, she was watching the whole time, and it's just fun.
Well, and that house in particular, Jeannie, it was literally on the beach, like the ocean kind of went underneath the house. It was right on this rock. And Lisa, all three of us went and we're like, I don't know, it looks like it's probably all rotten on the underside or whatever. Jeannie crawled under, and it was made out of island timber and stuff. So it was all true cut 2x4s, and they were 2 inches by 4 inches instead of whatever they are now. And it was perfect. It was in beautiful, pristine condition. And so we moved that house. And one of my favorite things was in the kitchen. It had this funky it was a very small kitchen, and it had what appeared to be a 2-burner stove, but you pulled it out and it turned into a 4-burner stove. But the best part is the manual for that 1954, whatever, funky little 2-burner, 4-burner stove was in the drawer, and it had like my grandmother basically on the cover with her little apron and her pumps, and it was this beautiful piece of history, right, that had lived on quite successfully in that home, and that we left because it still worked. They don't build them like they used to.
No, they don't. Yeah, we love our barged homes that we have in the Home Trust portfolio. There's definitely the energy efficiency challenge, which is a thing on the islands, especially where utilities are so expensive. So that's something that we're navigating. But I don't think anyone, including those homeowners, have any regrets about having those houses in the portfolio, because they have so much character, and each one has its own kind of funkiness and quirkiness. That's one of my favorite parts of our stories too, is the barged houses that we did. We're inspired by OPAL. Yeah, you guys did it, and then we figured out how to do it too. And so we have a little pocket neighborhood of them as well. I notice, I've been the executive director of the Home Trust for about 3 years now. And I noticed that need to be dynamic extends in a lot of directions. You get these opportunities from the community, things come up on the market, you want to snatch them up. It's really hard to do it because you're already operating on a shoestring, or something unexpected happens to a house in your portfolio, and suddenly you need funding for maintenance that you didn't expect. Or even on the home buyer side, people's lives change or unexpected things come up. So there's all types of sort of last minute challenges in closing on a home for people that come up. And so there's been lots of different mechanisms used to meet some of these funding shortages, from that homeowner piece all the way up to actually constructing homes. And I've seen lots of cool models, or been interested in lots of cool models around the country for how to do that. And actually right here locally, yet again, OPAL has done something that is pretty innovative around having some flexible funding that can be used to meet dynamic sets of needs in building your kind of community lending pools that you have over there. And I would love if you could tell us a little bit more about those lending pools and how they work, and especially if you've actually found them to be successful, or why not. I think the real question that I want to get to is, are they something you would encourage other communities to use?
So I'm going to cut to the chase and say that I think this is an example of the oak tree that we may have planted too late. But it is cool. So I will tell the origin story and then maybe turn it over to Julie to tell the impact and why we think where we think it's going. So many years ago, I think about 13 or 14 years ago, I ran for county council. And when I was running, one of the dominant stories that I heard going around the island was, we can't perpetuate the story that made this community what it is. And that story was folks who moved here in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were able to buy a piece of land, live on that land, live in a tent, build a building with one room, and engage with a local bank in a very informal way to get short-term loans that would enable them to slowly over time, as their income allowed, build their house. And that resulted in a quality of individuals who live in the islands, who were what I would describe as sort of Renaissance people who knew how to do a lot of different things. And that informs the culture of the place. So people were bemoaning the loss of that. The changes in regulations had made accessing bank mortgages so much harder. And so we at OPAL then engaged in a kind of study when I lost that election, came back to OPAL, and we engaged in a study process and decided to mimic the work that a local lender, there's an individual in our community who decided, rather than investing in Wall Street, what he was going to do was make mortgage loans available to people who couldn't get bank loans. He'd been doing that for about 15 years. And so we were both, one, how can we take that and translate it into a nonprofit setting where there's more regulation, and we're going to have to follow securities laws, and we're going to have to follow consumer financial protection laws, and how could we try and perpetuate that? So we set up a program that we call the Island Loan Fund, and we receive investments from individuals that they're making a loan to us for a period of time. We pool that money together, and then we loan it out to individuals who we deem to be creditworthy, but who can't get a bank loan, or for whom a bank loan is too expensive because it would be a loan on raw land.
Yeah.
Julie, over to you.
So the other thing, the other market that our fund was trying to serve was unbankable people or unbankable properties. And so, the yurt, the tiny home, the things that are sort of not conventional construction in one way or another that are difficult to finance through a conventional lender. Right. So those were the two things that we had identified that this local person often filled the gap for. And, he was trying to transition out of the business. So we finally, it was a lot of bureaucratic learning, right? The Securities and Exchange stuff, as well as the lending stuff that we all had to get through, as well as some exemptions we had to apply for, and a lot of red tape. And we're used to red tape, right? Like, we do affordable housing. We know about paperwork and bureaucracy, right? But on the backside of that, by the time we launched it, the market had become so expensive that really all that was left was kind of unbankable properties instead
Yeah.
of a mix of, unbankable people on properties that were more conventional. And so we do have loans. We still have some loans out. We found our niche has kind of been, there's been several people who, have some construction experience who are building their own homes. And so to Lisa's point about the kind of raw land acquisition and or raw land plus construction financing. So we've been able to do some of those, as well as some of the non-conforming home types. And so I think, for the folks that we've been able to serve, it's been quite successful. And the money's revolved around a couple times on a couple different loans. So where, if we have resources, we make a new one. But we've also been, pretty head down and busy in our new construction efforts with, first with Naples Grove, and Kidder Way is underway right now, a 10-unit homeowner project, and then P-Patch is our next one. So our ability to solicit resources for both the loan fund and for all these ongoing housing projects is pretty limited. But the other thing I will say is that we have been creative in other ways. So one of the reasons we felt a little bit comfortable going into this is we already held a portfolio of second mortgages, which is kind of that gap money that you were referencing in the beginning. So these loans that we've been doing for people are actual mortgages for folks that are trying to buy a piece of property. And one or two of them have been community land trust homeowners, but most of them are not. And then this other resource is, we had from way back when some resources to help serve lower income families. So, we might price homes for people earning 60% of median, but we serve families as low as 40% of median because of things like these second mortgages or different lending products, that kind of thing. And then the final way that we've been able to kind of do this sort of thing is we have our homeowners for the last 12 years maybe have paid into a reserve fund for their homes. So it helps pay for the exterior maintenance to kind of protect the exterior shell of the home. And it was something we developed when I was working with you all over at the Home Trust on your first project that we thought was going to have to be condominiumized. And so it turned into, it's something that's used across the country now. It's a great model. But we end up sitting on a fair amount of cash that we know is not going to be used. So our board approved taking a percentage of those reserves and loaning them out to individual homeowners who may not have one of those reserve funds on their homes because they purchased prior to us launching that. So those are smaller loans that we're able to make to folks for, a variety, like for replacing their roof or doing those kinds of capital. I think one homeowner did some accessibility things to her home. So we use those in a variety of ways too. So back to kind of the nimble and creative idea that we try to kind of meet the community needs within our own portfolio as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that is something that's really unique that you all have done. And we're seeing it, and this has been really on top of mind for us over here on San Juan as we've gone through this inflation crisis, and interest rates have been so high that even folks that we would typically have been able to serve, say 5 years ago, now there's this gap and we can't get them into housing. Luckily, that's starting to shift back, which is good, but the market's going to do what the market's going to do. And as you said, Julie, we want to be able to go even deeper. We want to be able to hit folks that are at 40% of AMI, 50% of AMI, help them get to a level of affordability where they can actually succeed in their home ownership. And that's difficult with a conventional loan or without any of that gap financing that exists. So it's a resource that I think and hope folks will consider and continue to kind of find innovative and creative ways to utilize it. But as you said, it's one of these things, our market has run away so much at this point. It becomes difficult to think about how to do things in the way that we used to do them. I think for me, one of the biggest challenges in the affordable housing world, even since I started in it about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, has been the dramatic rise in construction costs. It's been really, really incredible, particularly over the last decade. And I'm wondering, I feel like you two have an even better sense of this than most people, having been housing developers over the last 30 years. So can you talk a little bit about the drastic rise in construction and how that's affected building housing?
So I did, because you sent us these questions, I did go into our records to sort of pull some statistics. So since OPAL finished the construction of the OPAL Commons neighborhood,
Mhm.
1994, so 30 years ago. Overall cost to deliver a home of about 1,000 square feet, which is what we do. Some of our homes are smaller, some are a little larger, but our average is about 1,000 square feet. Have risen 628%, which
Wow.
is an average of 30% per year. Now, I will say that I think a little bit of that is that we do a better quality product than we did in the early years. In part, the market shifted, and so we were able to access a lot of more durable, greener materials choices than we were in our first homes. But the biggest drivers, percentage-wise, in those increases have been the professional services that we've had to hire: architect, civil engineer, wetland specialist, geotechnical, in order to comply with the requirements both of our granting agencies and of building and land use codes. So that's gone up 1,710% over that 30-year period. And the biggest driver in terms of actual dollars, because that professional services dollars wise is a smaller chunk of the whole, but the biggest change dollars wise is the building construction. That went from 1994, 30 years ago, $67,000 to deliver basically 1,000 square foot home. So now we're under construction on the Kidder Way homes, and those are duplexes, but each side of that duplex is costing us, the building only, $365,000. And the most stark increase has been since the pandemic. So we finished construction in 2020 of a rental neighborhood of 45 homes that were, the buildings were fourplexes of townhomes. And we're doing almost the same design at Kidder Way, but in duplexes. And there's an 86% increase from the cost to build the buildings at April's Grove to building the buildings at Kidder Way. So just 5 years, 86%. I mean, that's not sustainable. And I really hope there's changes in that marketplace. But it has felt a little bit existential to Julie and me in terms of,
we keep thinking there's an error in a spreadsheet somewhere, and there's just not, right? Like it seems like I can remember when Lisa was first doing the Kidder Way spreadsheet, which is the project that's under construction right now, and she sent me it, and she's like, "Can you just make sure there's no error? Because please find an error." You know, like surely.
I feel you, and I have sort of taken on this challenge at a time. This has been the 5 years and I've been really anchored in doing this, and it's the feeling existential about it is very, very real. It's hard to look forward and figure out how we keep doing it without, as you said, Lisa, significant community resources helping us cover those gaps from those who have been able to benefit from this market and who have the resources to give where that makes sense for them and where they're able to invest in these partnerships. But yeah, something's going to have to give somewhere for us to keep going. I don't know how we keep building in these conditions or generating enough dollars to build. It feels pretty impossible sometimes, but still feeling pretty hopeful. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Julie?
Well, I would love to share a slide that I have, if I may.
Go ahead.
Let me see if I can do this in the best way. So we have some slides from that Lisa had put together, and we updated for a presentation last spring at the Northwest Community Land Trust meeting, which was highlighting the sort of cost over time as it's represented by resources used. So give me a second to get this up. Okay, so this is a slide of community investment resources and amounts over time, which means basically the subsidy that OPAL is putting into each unit that it creates. So Lisa talked about our origin story. In 1994, those first 18 OPAL Commons homes were completed. And you can see, it was a very small subsidy. Some of those units, we had kind of 2 levels of subsidy in that neighborhood. And this is a number I love to remind people of. So some of the units had only $5,000 of subsidy in them, and some
Wow.
had 35,000, an additional 30 to hit lower incomes. So that is why that first little, bar is so short. And the bulk of that was state funding. And then you can see it kind of went up and down over the years, but the blue bars are the private funding. So that's the private philanthropy, really, mostly from within our own community, that's helped us make these things happen, which is, quite extraordinary. We were, I think, one of the kind of forerunners in the industry across the country of accessing private donations as a source of capital instead of just a source of operating funding. But you can see those numbers went up and down over the years. 2020, I think, represents April's Grove, which was our rental project, and that was that can't be without private funding. So I'm not sure what 2020 is. Lisa, can you?
That might be the last house we moved, Julie.
Okay. So we did it just without any extra resources. Yeah. And then you can see what happened in 2024, right? So all of a sudden we went from being able to pull this off, with $150,000 per unit up to $450,000 a unit, right? So just astronomically different than ever before. And one of the things that people like to highlight in the community land trust world is, people talk about the cost of land, but often our experience is the actual land cost is quite low for many of these projects, but the site development costs are the other component that have been pushing costs up substantially. And that's true for Kidder Way as well.
Cool. Yeah, when you see that chart, it's very telling. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that makes scaling really difficult. If you average it out, the Home Trust has built an average of 2 houses per year since we have started our existence. And one of my and our current board's biggest interest has been, how do we scale that up? How do we figure out how to meet need? How do we show up for our community in ways that are actually creating a bigger dent in the problem? Which is really difficult to do. I mean, the work to bring those 2 houses a year online is incredible in this community already, and has taken so much generosity and commitment and dedication. So thinking about scaling is, especially considering that chart that we just looked at and how much it costs to just bring 1 house online, scaling is really difficult. But I think it's been something that OPAL has done well over the years. And I guess I'd love to, just from that historical perspective, what do you think were the key drivers in the points that you were able to really expand your portfolio quickly? What was driving that?
What was the driver for the expansion?
I think one thing that we learned was that our growth came in fits and starts, but was sort of historically, back in the day, an average of 5 units a year. That was we might not deliver anything for a couple of years and then deliver 20 units. And now we're up at 10 units a year. So we've sort of grown that capacity over time, but it still comes in fits and starts. And then one thing that I think is true in today's market is, without the affordable housing fund at the county level, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing anymore. And that's been a really critical component, because the federal resources are kind of gone. That's what we used to use in the very beginning. The state resources have been growing, but not nearly keeping up with the costs. And the private resources have been expanding, but that's hard to keep up, and you never know what the market is going to throw at you in that regard. But so the local resource has been extraordinary in enabling us to continue to grow in the face of these, really rapidly rising costs.
Yeah.
And one of the other advantages I mentioned earlier on, that, we really are striving to meet some portion of the need, some significant portion of the need across that continuum of very low income up to middle income. And when we accept grants from government agencies, those come with limitations on the income of the households that we could serve. So we have our own internal policy, which essentially says, if your assets and income don't enable you to buy a low-cost house on the island, then you can buy from us, because we see ourselves as, complementing and trying to go where the traditional market can't go. But if you look at that capital stack of what it takes, the amount of money that it takes to take a house from the cost to deliver down to the price where it's affordable for somebody, if we have to do all of that with private donations, plus we need to fundraise to operate our organization in order to maintain the capacity, so we have the staff and the knowledge and the board that's ready to do that work. It is stretching us right now. We can do both.
Yeah, I remember in that same presentation that you did, Julie, with the slowest gathering.
Now we can hear the tree work, Julie.
Oh, is that the same? Julie's taking down a tree at her house, folks. So yeah, I remember also at that presentation, Julie, you had a slide, I believe, that showed OPAL staffing levels and projects that were coming online as a comparison to each other. And that lives rent free in my brain. And I think it really gets to what Lisa is saying about having the bench that you need to be able to take opportunities. And what I don't think a lot of people know is, like, there's not government funding that is funding these community land trusts. All of our operating dollars are coming from private donations. That is, I mean, for us at the Home Trust, that's effectively how we're doing 100% of our operations currently. We're definitely exploring how to access public funds to support our operations, but overwhelmingly that is coming from private donations. And I think that just an understanding that there is this very direct correlation that when OPAL had more staffing, they were able to sort of generate more ability to do projects. And I think that that's intuitive, but it's also something that in your own history has been really evident, and you've been able to do that. I don't know. I just want to highlight that for people as we have this conversation. I don't know that people always realize there's not some steady fund of government dollars that is staffing our organizations. There's just not. Oh, there it is.
So I can share that slide.
Sometimes I just slide at night.
So that's it. So the blue line represents the average number of new units we brought online, and the purple line is the FTEs we've had over time. And then we had another slide that was about kind of our stewardship.
Julie, FTE being full-time equivalent, just because not everybody lives in that world.
So the left-hand axis shows you, that number of staff people, basically. And so we have another slide that talked about kind of the number of units stewarded per full-time person in our office, because, we are doing this new development, and there's a certain level of capacity that's required to pull any of that off. But we also have to steward the units, the homes, and the homeowners that are in our portfolio, which for us now is, I think we're at about 210 units-ish, Lisa?
Something like that. Yeah. I never remember.
And close to half rental, half owner-occupied.
Yeah, that's such a growth spurt for any community land trust. I know it's one that the Home Trust is in right now, where we've now hit this point where we've got a portfolio of existing houses. We've got 49 that we've built, and we need to figure out how to make sure that we're taking care of those, that we're maintaining those, that we're, doing our stewardship work on our existing portfolio, which takes money, time, staff, and increasing money, time, staff as the portfolio increases, and still delivering new units, figuring out how to do new construction, taking on deals. All that takes expansion as well. So you all have done a good job with it. And as you've said, you've had this really historic level of private investment into these community assets from donors on Orcas Island, which is pretty amazing. Well, I wonder if we can shift gears and talk a little bit about what you're doing next in this landscape of difficulty. I know that there are some actually really innovative things that OPAL is doing on the horizon, and I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what you have coming up.
Sure. So we're currently, as Julie mentioned, under construction with 10 homes in 5 duplexes for home ownership. And then we have collaborated with our local community resource center and the food bank, and our community foundation was a part of this collaboration to help raise the money. But the three organizations that are going to collaborate in co-stewarding the land are OPAL. We're going to be building 20 rental townhomes for very low income. So households with incomes below 50% and 30% of area median income. And that housing will have supportive services from the Community Resource Center with a half-time social worker dedicated to supporting the individuals living in that rental housing with what their needs are in order to succeed. And then on that same campus will be a permanent home for the food bank and a permanent home for the Community Resource Center. So that's huge, because the food bank is currently operating out of storage containers, and their staff are located in four different locations, staff and storage of materials. And the Community Resource Center is in a space that is too small. It's been a great space, but is not currently fully accessible. And so that collaboration will bring the community land trust model to bear for those community needs. So OPAL is the landowner and steward, and will lease the land to the Resource Center and Food Bank for them to have ownership of their facilities on that. And then OPAL does own some other land that right now is actually not available to develop. In one case, it's land in an area where there's a water moratorium. So we're hoping to engage with help to lift that moratorium, which is meeting Department of Health requirements. And then another piece of land is actually outside the urban growth area boundary. And so as the community grows and the needs expand, it is abutting the urban growth area. And so our intention with that acquisition was to be ready for that next generation of the community has. So
yeah, holding land is a big deal. Land is power, and we know that having it in the portfolio is definitely worthwhile. Is the P-Patch project the only permanent supportive housing that's going to exist in the islands? Is there any other permanent supportive housing?
It will be the first housing with that orientation.
Designation, right, with that full wraparound. That's amazing. And I came from permanent supportive housing into community land trust work. And I have often thought about how needed it is here. So I'm very, very grateful that OPAL is taking on that need, because it's a difficult one to meet, and it is something that we are going to see an increasing need for here in the islands, I think. So well, my last question is a fun question. I want to hear your dreams for the future of OPAL. If you had a magic wand that you could wave and do anything, what would you do?
I actually don't believe in magic wands because I mean, I love the idea of visioning, but part of what, to me, it's that journey of partnership with the community that is where the magic has happened. So I think my vision and my hope is that we can continue to have growth across the full continuum, that we can be viewed by our renters and our homeowners as good partners in respecting, their privacy, but also being there as a support if they need us, and that the community only grows in their sense of kind of ownership over OPAL as something that they're really proud to live in a place where we're really aware of the impacts of that income inequality and what it means in terms of the health of the community, and people are really actively engaged in addressing it. So
that's a good dream. What about you, Julie?
Sorry, I was just trying to make sure my mic was on after the tree cutting. I am looking for a magic wand as it relates to, I keep feeling like the royal we, like you all, us, a lot of us together need to collectively dig into this cost issue and figure out a solution, because the answer isn't just to throw more and more money at it. We need a different solution to bringing down the cost of construction. And for the life of me, I can't figure out where all that money's going. But it is a lot of money. And I do, so I that's my dream, is that we can kind of crack that nut and bring those costs back in alignment with our ability to deliver on a larger scale. Lisa
Yeah.
mentioned that property that's outside of the urban growth area. It has, assuming it eventually comes in, the development potential there is quite extraordinary. And so, that could be a long build out, a long planning process, a long community engagement process, and a long build out. And so, kind of being prepared for that with a better solution to construction costs, and to more efficiently being able to deliver these high quality homes that we've done historically. So that's the wand I'm looking for. And
That's
I do
also
think that we've been good at finding creative solutions. So I feel like there's no reason we can't figure out one for this problem as well.
Yeah. I think my dream is like a combination of those two things. It's just the greater solidarity, greater, I see innovative stuff happening. Like, I don't know, I'm sure that you both have heard of the project that's happening on Whidbey with Ross Chapin, and they're taking a larger piece of land. They're selling it off to smaller contractors who can each take a bite to their level of ability to bite it off, and cutting costs in that way, or at least collectively building that out faster and more methodically. And so I love that idea because of the ways that all these different entities are coming together to address a problem. So I think that's my dream, is just that we keep growing our ability to do that. Well, is there anything else that you two want to add? This has been such a fun conversation.
Oh, there goes the tree.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to say thanks for having us. And I want to put a plug in for San Juan County voters to approve the land bank tax, because that is in fact what enables us to have the affordable housing tax as well. So if that is not passed, that wonderful resource that's keeping us, enabling us to continue to develop new homes, will be eliminated. So those are my parting words. Please vote yes.
Yeah, and just
on the land bank.
That REIT, that affordable housing tax touches on so many of the things that we have talked about, from the conversation that we had around how do we meet our operating budgets, that we need to have adequate staffing. Well, the home fund allows us to do that because it's locally controlled. The home fund allows us to serve up to 115% of AMI, which is a huge thing that a lot of our state resources don't allow us to do. And we know that missing middle is so needed here. So renew the land bank. I think all of our organizations are in full support of this, and I hope that the voters will get out there and help us keep the home fund moving and keep our work alive, for sure. Well, thank you both.
Thank you so much for hosting this, and to CNL2 for making this resource available.
Yes, very much. Thank you to CNL2. We're shifting to the stream. I think this is the first streamed episode, definitely of Boxed Out, but I think it may even be one of the first streams for the new CNL2 format. So I am very grateful to you both for being here and sharing all of the wisdom that you have. And also, I'm just so thankful that you do the work that you do, and that you paved the way for me to do it. I personally just look up to you both so much, and I am so grateful I got to have this conversation with you.
Thanks, Amanda.
All right. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time on Boxed Out. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming to another episode of Boxed Out. As I'm sure you've noticed, we're now streaming, so we are no longer doing our weekly episodes. These will be available on demand as we're able to produce them, meaning stay tuned to the Boxed Out page on the CNL YouTube channel for updates, and you'll be the first to know when a new episode comes out. Thanks so much for being a part of this community. We appreciate you.